Thank you everybody for who's attending right now. We really appreciate it. This is Marketing Pittsburgh's first Power Panel. We're really excited that you guys are all here to join us. I think this is going to be a great one. We are here to re-energize your content and email marketing. We have a great panel for you, and we also have a superstar moderator with us, Laurie Barkman. For those of you who don't know Laurie, she is the CEO of SmallDotBig. She works with entrepreneurs and companies to develop strategies for innovation, transition, and growth. A little background about Laurie. She was a former CEO of Genco Marketplace, which was acquired by FedEx. She's also the former CEO and managing partner of Topanga Partners, which is a boutique private equity firm. She's got over 20 years of digital marketing experience, and she's worked with places like American Eagle Outfitters, the Art Institutes, Resumator, which has become Jazz HR. So we're obviously very lucky to have her. And Laurie's also an adjunct instructor of entrepreneurship at Carnegie Mellon. And she sits on the advisory board at MSA's Startup Safety IO. So, and of course, in her spare time, if you can believe it, she also hosts the Secession Stories podcast. You guys really should check that out. She does interviews and has insights for the next generation entrepreneurs. Again, we're very lucky to have here. So please join me in welcoming Miss Laurie Barkman.
Hey, thanks so much, Eric, and thanks Marketing Pittsburgh for pulling us all together today. This is a great panel. I think you're all going to walk away with a lot of learnings, and we'll have opportunity at the end for the live session, people joining us live to ask questions and interact with the panel. So with no further ado, let's introduce the panel now, and I want to welcome them. First, Scott Rogerson, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, Marketing Pittsburgh, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Scott, the CEO of UpContent, which is a SaaS technology product for helping marketing and salespeople with their curated content needs.
Thanks, Scott. And I also want to let everybody know, just in full disclosure, I am an investor in UpContent. Next, I'd like Steve Wagner to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks Marketing Pittsburgh, and thanks everybody for attending. My name is Steve, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Webbula. We help organizations market more confidently through email verification services and data enrichment services.
All right, thanks. And next, Robb Luther, if you can introduce.
Yeah, my name is Robb Luther. I'm a partner at Pittsburgh Internet Consulting and the Vice President of Business Development. We're an inbound marketing agency and a HubSpot Platinum partner in Pittsburgh.
Awesome. And last but not least, Miss Carolyn Keller. Can you introduce yourself, please, Carolyn?
Laurie, my name is Carolyn, and I'm the founder of Curio 412. We are a consultancy for helping increase the strategy and capacity of nonprofit organizations, which often includes looking at the digital media and what strategies they're using for communication.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. First question for the panel. We're going to go through everyone for a response. I wanted to start with kind of pre-post COVID-19. What was it like before, and what are we seeing? So the question is about changes in content marketing. You know, what have you noticed since the start of the pandemic, and what is one change, whether strategic or tactical, that you've seen? And what is your opinion on whether or not that change is temporary or if it's here to stay? Robb, why don't we start with you?
So I think probably the biggest strategical change that has happened since COVID is businesses trying to let everybody know that they are open for business. Just that getting that message out there, just from a strategical perspective, seems like the big thing. Tactically, I think a lot of businesses are trying to move online like we're doing today. So you see a lot more webinars and things like that happening right now. It might be delivering content from pre-COVID, but that tactic on how that is being delivered has shifted some.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn?
I see a lot of diversification, especially the expansion of the types of content and how much organizations are bringing out that content. So I've seen organizations recycle and revamp content that they've already had for the digital atmosphere. And I've also seen them adapt to current changes by using live videos or interviews or get-togethers with experts. And this is just some of the ways it's actually improved access to a lot of nonprofits and access to a lot of spaces that maybe you wouldn't have had a chance to visit otherwise. So hopefully it's a change that is here to stay, that can still be used even post-COVID.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, a couple things. I think we've seen a lot more advanced targeting in content of the essential worker and the frontline healthcare workers. A lot more interest in identifying those folks, and then you're using appreciation to build a brand. Number one, and number two, video has always been getting more and more popular each year. But I think I just read something yesterday that said there's 70% more use of video during the pandemic than even what was projected for 2020, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. I think we've advanced in digital transformation in the span of 3 months of probably what would have taken 10 years.
Thank you. And Scott?
Yeah, and aligning with Steve on some of the expedited trends. I think one of the things that we've seen and marketers have always talked about is the alignment between marketing and sales and some collaboration between those two groups. I think over the last 3 months or so, we've seen that actually come to fruition in a lot more organizations where they're having joint meetings and joint planning and joint metrics between what sales is looking for and how marketing can best support those activities. Hopefully that's not something that's going to recede when COVID is done, and be excited when we don't have to talk about that anymore. But also, I do think that doesn't mean that the in-person activities will cease to exist, but hopefully that collaboration, particularly on the digital side, will become a supporting cast for the sales activities, with marketing still assisting in those strategies.
Yeah, so webify, diversify, target, align, and collaborate. I'm guessing all of those are here to stay. So that leads into the second question, which is around strategy. How do you advise clients who are looking for tactical solutions? An example might be, writing blog posts, things like that, but they don't yet have a strategy in place from a big picture. What mistakes can be avoided by focusing on strategy first? So this question, we're going to go to Robb and then Steve. Robb?
So without a strategy, you're not effective because you're not writing content that's targeted toward anything. So really what you want to do, and we're an inbound agency, so we like to build buyer personas, but we also really like to see what missions those buyers are trying to accomplish, those buyer personas are trying to accomplish. And when we know what those missions are, we can look and see where our products and services intersect with what they're trying to accomplish. And once you see that, then you can start breaking that mission down into friction points and fundamental needs that the customer has to complete in order to solve that mission. And that is your content strategy. You want to build your content strategy around those friction points and those fundamental needs.
Friction points. So it sounds like a complicated thing. Is it hard to figure out what those friction points are?
I mean, it can be. Well, that's where B2B is typically pretty easy because they have very specific things that they're trying to accomplish. It could be like trying to fit a part into a particular footprint. So it's just a matter of really working with the sales and marketing in order to really dig into who the customer is, what they're trying to accomplish. And the sales team, they're the front line. They're the ones that are getting all the feedback from the customers. So they know what the friction points are. But you just have to make sure that that is all getting communicated to marketing as well, so that you can start building that content around it.
Definitely, from an integrated approach for sure. Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, when you think about content marketing and a content marketing strategy, it can be really intimidating. You think about all the activities and everything you have to do and all the planning and everything. But what's really been helpful in my career and what I advise people is start with the end in mind. What is the end result of this strategy? And that might seem like a simplistic question, but you're going to have much different tactics and much different cadences of those tactics if your end in mind is to drive leads versus just a thought leadership, campaign or a multimodal, kind of marketing effort. So if you really start with what do I want to get out of this, and what do people I report to expect me to get out of this, and then have that collaborative conversation, you'll find that working backwards is a much more simpler way to go.
Yeah, and strategy often does start with that goal. What is that measurable impact you're trying to make? And it is one of my favorite quotes from Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind, which is a great lead into the next question, which is around goals and ROI. This is going to be for Scott and Carolyn. What do you think are the most important goals for content marketing, and how are these measured? Scott?
Yeah, I think, tying into a lot of the strategy conversations, I think it's somewhat futile to expect that you're going to change that decision-making process of your target customer, your target buyer, but instead try to expedite and reinforce and support that process so they're getting that information from you and making their decision. We see a lot of statistics around, we're at 70+% of buyers now, whether they're B2B or B2C, not feeling like they need to talk to someone to make that decision. They should be able to make it all on their own. And the number of people that are participating in that decision now being at 7 people from, I think, 5 a few years ago. So what you're creating and how you're helping to design that content should help move people through that process. And your measurement should be at each stage in that process, because it is complicated. Where is friction? How are people moving to the end? And even though you have the end in mind, it shouldn't just be a single metric of how many new leads did we create, but at what point did those leads fall off, and where are their current friction points or inefficiencies?
Yeah, if you look at email just as an example, if you improve your open rate, you're by default going to improve your overall outputs through the funnel, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, great, thanks. And Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
Sure. In the nonprofit sector, instead of trying to drive sales or leads most of the time, we think about 3 goals being fundraising, engagement, and awareness. If you have, say, a museum, you're looking to find new individual donors or major gifts, you're looking for new memberships, and a lot of those things can be measured just by the amount of fundraising you do. On the engagement side, you can definitely look at the way in which you're engaging. So sometimes that includes web traffic or what you're getting on social media, but other times it's things as simple as, has your content marketing been able to get you volunteers or subscribers or people who are interested in coming and viewing and being a part of the mission that you're trying to get across? So all of that ties in, and people being aware too. I think that once you are able to have successful content marketing, you're able to get more inquiries about your organization and its mission, and really think about what that looks like in terms of then continuing to drive engagement and fundraising. So all those goals work together, but they're slightly different from the traditional sense of content marketing for business.
Yeah, and it's great to review the goals on a periodic basis, and a lot of organizations do goal setting on an annual basis. And it might be the great reset now, that it's time to kind of rethink, relook at what those goals are. We're approaching Q3, it's hard to believe, right? It's almost time for that annual strategic planning process. And so certainly for marketers, I'm sure that that's going to be a very important thing to be integrated with. The next question is around personas and marketing funnels, and personas were mentioned earlier. The question here is going to be for Scott and for Rob. Do you use marketing funnels as a framework for content marketing and develop context for the audiences you're targeting? Scott, why don't you start us off?
So yes, I think is the summation of the answer to that. It's important to utilize those funnels. I do believe and put a lot of weight into the evolution of the funnel as HubSpot has defined it, moving from that funnel to the flywheel concept, and really trying to do that to articulate that this is not a linear path of just a lot of people then flows down to fewer and fewer, and then you have your customers, but more of that cyclical process, and also re-emphasizing how do you activate current customers to drive new leads. So funnels are important as you think about where content fits in, but try not to think about it as just a beginning and an end goal. And personas certainly play a role in there, not just thinking about the traditional demographic information, but current state of mind. And particularly over these last few months, as you had mentioned, that state of mind has probably changed fairly greatly for those target audience members. And so how are you now addressing that in the context of your funnel?
Quick follow-up question for you before we jump to Rob. Some articles out there have said the funnel is dead. Yeah. While others say long live the funnel, it just looks different. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is not dead. I think if you dig into a lot of those, they are talking about this idea of just dump as many people into the top as possible and hope that through percentages, some people will come out at the end, and you can no longer just drive as many people into the top as possible, but efficiently use those dollars and define what a qualified person is to fit in at the top. Be smarter about who you're throwing in to the top of that funnel. And most importantly, those who have made it all the way through that process and are now delighted customers or donors, how do you then cycle them back to find more people like them?
Okay, thank you. Rob, your thoughts?
So, like I said before, I like to focus more so probably on the missions than the actual buyer personas, because the mission, a mission for a buyer persona could apply to multiple buyer personas. So rather than focusing in on one specific buyer, if we focus in on that job to be done or that mission, then we're kind of covering our bases across multiple buyer personas. Not to say that the buyer personas aren't useful, they are, but they kind of work hand in hand with those missions. And then from a funnel perspective, I like to, like I said before, I like to break those down into friction points and build content around a particular friction point. Start off with maybe some sort of offer that really addresses what that friction point is, and then create blog posts or video or some other type of content vehicle to feed people into that particular offer to solve for that pain point. And then once they download that offer, then we can use HubSpot, build a workflow or something to help nurture them further through to solve that particular friction point, or go to a related friction point and just kind of diversify the information that we have to help them through their mission.
Okay, thank you. The next question is going to be for Carolyn and Steve regarding creating capacity. And a lot of teams, the smaller teams especially, deal with this, but even larger teams who are stretched can feel that they need to streamline their content marketing efforts. Everyone's pulled in a lot of directions. So I was wondering if you could share some examples of what some of the best practices are for how teams can create that capacity. Carolyn, let's start with you.
I think one of the most important things is the strategy that we've been talking about, and having a plan and knowing exactly what fits into that. So understanding who you're marketing towards and those personas, and also understanding what your team's capacity is for content creation. So if you have those two things in mind, the personas and the capacity for content creation, you're really going to be able to create a strategy and plan that's going to create efficiency in what you can make and where you can market it to, and that will give you the most out of your investment with the content creation there.
Have you seen examples with small teams where you have some success stories you can share?
Sure. One of the teams that I've worked with, we had a couple of different plans for our email marketing, for our content marketing, especially on social media, but it was too much. We only had 1 or 2 team members that were able to focus on it, and that wasn't their sole focus, was marketing. So we ended up bringing on a strategist, actually. And so we made a small investment in someone who could come as an outside consultant. And that consultant really takes us through month by month and has us look at, here are the different types of campaigns we're going to look through. Here is exactly where we're going to post those different campaigns and how those campaigns are going to each lead to the different end goals that we have. And even just by having someone to go step by step and someone to help us keep organized, it really helped us streamline what we're doing. And then once we had that calendar of events and calendar for content, we were even able to more figure out what it looked like to have each different team member work on different parts of that to all come together as a whole. And now it's something that happens maybe within a couple of days, as opposed to having weeks of us trying to really focus on this. So it's been a really great fix for something that was difficult.
I call that muscle memory, right? So you had the resources, you had the tools, you had the processes, and then it eventually got to be more efficient, more effective. Steve, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't agree more with the concept of plan. I think the smaller the team, the better you have to plan. Because you will get swallowed up in 18 other things, and then it will just be a calendar and not a strategy, right? So I think I'm certainly guilty of that in the past, but I think that is key for lower capacity groups. I think also to extend your reach beyond your 4 walls, get out there and try to connect with industry experts, with industry influencers in your space, talk about, shared ideas and values, and, maybe not pitch your product, but talk about a concept that you both are passionate about, and then write together about that, because when they post about it, they have a network that's infinitely bigger than yours. So that makes you seem a lot bigger than your current team. And, and Carolyn, you're speaking my language. We're literally living that example that you just gave. We're living that right now. I have a brand spanking big content marketing team of 2 people. And you're looking at half the team on this, and we have recently utilized an outside strategist to help us, coordinate, plan, extend that reach, everything that I just talked about. It's all part of the investment. So absolutely, can't stress that enough for small teams.
Yeah, and so augmenting with people who have an expertise and at the right budget level, resource level for that organization makes a lot of sense. And by the way, I neglected to mention in the beginning, so I apologize. I wanted to recognize Webbula and thank you for becoming a sponsor of Marketing Pittsburgh. Yeah, they're our newest sponsor. So thank you so much for that, Steve. I agree with building the network and building staffing accordingly to the resource capacity is one way. And I think someone brought up earlier the topic of repurposing content, and that's, if you create it once and then use it in multiple ways and multiple times, it's a way to really leverage your asset that you've created. So repurposing, I'm a big fan of that strategy too. So that leads into the next question around content and content optimization. I wanted to talk about the optimum content for a promotional campaign. And I realize there's a lot of different ways, to go about this, but you can include all kinds of different channels and platforms like email, video, social, drip campaigns, time-based elements. And I was interested in hearing from Scott and Steve about best practices for how those content elements work together. And if you could each share some examples of work that you've personally been involved with, or even just from the best practices that you've seen out in the marketplace. So Scott, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the biggest, it kind of rides on what was just talked about, of focusing on the content that you create as assets and actually separating the creation process from the distribution process, planning out how that piece of content is going to be utilized across those channels, but not creating something just for social or just for email or just for this week, but really treating those as distribution sides and seeing those content pieces as reusable assets, both in maybe I'll send out multiple emails about that piece, but more importantly, how do I leverage email as a channel to drive more qualified traffic to the original asset that I just spent a lot of time creating over many months. And so seeing and understanding how you treat the asset of the content you're creating, and then maybe the operating expenditures of finding other articles or doing some advertising or creating posts or attending events and driving traffic back to those original pieces through those channels is important. I think gone are the days of I'm going to create a new blog, I'm going to send out an email saying I created a new blog, and I'm going to write 3 or 4 social pieces saying I created a blog, and then I'm going to go and create my next blog and then recycle that process over and over again. But really tying that together to what's the ultimate mission, I think that's a great word to use, of how those pieces are supposed to interrelate and help our customers make a decision. And those channels are just different ways to touch those people, understanding of how they're going to behave when they see that item and what you want them to do next.
Great, thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I think everybody on this call uses all of those channels, 17 times a day, right? So it's not, like Scott just said, it's not about focusing on the channel per se. It's about having a conversation across all of those channels. So all of your stuff has to be segmented. It has to be personalized and relevant, because a blog post, sure, it's going to be a little longer probably than a social post, but you're still trying to get the same point across. And I think really also proper attribution and making sure you have triggers, to push across channels is really important too, because longer than, I as a lead gen guy, I try to find the one single thing that drove that person so that I can pump more money into that budget. But there's always a little bit of attribution. It's hardly anybody, even within a channel, within my paid channel, there's still 3 or 4 different sub channels underneath there that drove that to the moment of Zen where they filled out a lead form. So you have to have all that kind of set up, again, planning in mind before you kick things off.
Attribution is a topic in and of itself. Maybe
sure
a
is.
follow-up question for you there. Do you find that most clients are satisfied with sort of direct attribution, or they also want to know the indirect and trying to connect all those dots?
Well, my internal customers certainly want to see the single point. When I start talking about multiple point attribution, I can see their eyes glaze over, and Charlie Brown's school teacher effect. They just want to know, was it that ad, or was it the blog post that drove people here? So we have kind of a definitive, a more weighted attributed lead source that we use in our CRM and things of that nature. But it's always told from my perspective of the understanding that, hey, that person also was on this list and also saw that post, and along the way. So, I think you have to have a point where, to do proper ROI, you have to have a point where you make that call where what was the one thing that pushed them over the edge. But again, still communicate to the rest of the leadership, people that aren't living in it every single day, that it is a constant journey of everything. Otherwise, they're going to cut you off from those other things, and then you lose conversation points.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I've been in lead generation world and direct response world, and it is an art and a science, as they say. Well, this question I'm going to give to the whole panel instead of just two people, and I call it the Mythbuster question. I'd love for you guys to weigh in. What is one myth, or more if you have more than one, that you want everyone to stop believing when it comes to content marketing? Rob, let's start with you.
Content marketing does not apply to my company. That's probably the biggest one I hear. People just think that their company is apparently not worth writing about, or they feel that it just isn't relevant to them, which is kind of funny. I feel that any company that is selling to a human being has content to create. So that's probably the biggest one I've come across.
That's a big one. Any others before we shift over to Carolyn?
Oh, geez. Anybody can create content is another one. So they'll just pick a random person at the company and say, it's your job to write blog posts. I wouldn't ask some random person to write a Stephen King novel. I wouldn't necessarily ask a random person to write a blog post either. So I think there's a skill to content creation, and not just anybody is suited for it.
Carolyn, your thoughts?
I think the biggest one that I see is that the planning is less important than the content itself. I'll work with so many organizations that say, well, we'd love to create a really engaging video, or we want to create this. They have the idea of the content first, but without, and I know we've said this throughout this whole panel, without the strategy and goals, any content you create, it could be the best content, but it might not do exactly what you want it to if you're not thinking about that strategy first. So I'd say make sure you have those clear goals first before you start thinking about content, and then you can start thinking about what assets you have.
Okay, any others to add?
Oh gosh, that's really the main one that I have run into is a very high focus on the content without the planning.
Got it. Got it. All right, Steve, how about for you?
Yeah, I'd say the big myth is, we don't have enough to write about. And I think you're just not asking the right amount of people in your organization if you feel that way. I have found inspiration in talking to customer service folks and, tell me about customer horror stories or the best call that you took today. I love to sit in on sales calls after a lead's been generated. Not only to obviously hear any insight that I might be able to take into the front end, but also I'm listening for the terms that they're using, because you can get inside your own bubble a lot and start speaking about stuff that makes sense to you. And if you're not using that term, if the market's not using that term, then there's no reason for you to be using it in the content. So there's always solutions and always problems that you can be solving through your content and talk through it in that manner.
Great. Scott?
It aligns a lot with that, but it's kind of the communication and content is marketing's problem to deal with. And they're going to have to go figure that out, but I just don't like anything that they're providing, so one of the focal points, and this aligns with what Steve was saying, right? Getting sales involved and helping to identify content that should be created. Like what's missing? What's that follow up or that takeaway that they don't have that would be great to send somebody to? What's success hearing? What's HR hearing from a talent acquisition standpoint? And not just treating content as this is a way to get new qualified leads in. It should be much more than that. And those new qualified leads are going to appreciate getting that broader understanding of who that organization is and what they're all about, not just feeling like you're trying to push them down a linear funnel.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would add one. I'm not sure exactly how to say it, but I think it has to do with frequency, that, my client base doesn't want to hear from me very often, something like that. And of course, frequency is really very subjective. But I would add that to the list. But I thought you guys came up with a great list. I think there's probably many more out there, and that maybe our audience has encountered. And if you want to weigh in on that in the chat, please do. Now we have plenty of time for questions. So So Eric, I thought we would open it up to the group. Do you want them to submit questions via chat, or do you want them to ask out loud?
Why don't we do chat questions? Would that be okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey.
Okay. So just put your question in chat, and then we will, and if you have someone specific for the panel that you want to direct it to, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll figure that out on our end.
You know, to touch real quick, Laurie, on what you just said, it's interesting because you do have people that think that they have to put out content at an extremely regular basis when they don't necessarily have to. And then you start seeing blog posts coming up that might be an old trade show or a company party, or, you know, they're just writing content to write content. And it's just don't do that.
Yeah. The other one that comes up I see out there is, and I think this might be accredited back to Gary V, because I think he's a big proponent of putting a lot of content in every channel possible. And so a question that I see out there is, should I really do that? And so maybe the Gary V, you know, philosophy is the myth that should be the right answer. Just put it everywhere. You know, it doesn't matter what it is. And I've been paying a lot of attention lately to the podcast crowd, because that's now a crowd that I'm a part of. And that's definitely a resource limited group, because a lot of them are doing their own marketing. And so that is, and so personally, and with my own different companies that I've worked with over the years, I don't personally aspire to the Gary Vee philosophy. I think it is more important to know your audience and understand what is resonating with them. And that's a point that you guys have called out here today. So one question, and Eric's giving that to the group here. Do you need calls to action in every piece of content? I'll open it up to the panel. Who wants to take that one?
I would say yes. Virtually every piece of content that is an awareness stage piece of content, meaning this is the content that is going to attract somebody to your website, which is probably a blog post. When they land on that blog post, you should have some sort of call to action that is related to that blog post, not a random call to action, but something specific that'll help them finish the mission that they're starting by reading that content.
Which I'm assuming goes back to the strategy in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that and double down on Robb's statement that it does not mean that every single piece needs to have a sign up for a demo or call us, right? They're not at that stage yet in that piece of content in many cases. It should be, what would be the next thing that they should be doing if they wanted to further their understanding of whatever they just read, right? If they were reading an idea around a theory or your perspective on an industry trend, should they go to a white paper? Should they watch a webinar recording? Should they go watch a video? It probably isn't sign up for a call until they get to the solutions level content, and then they feel like they're ready to sign up for that call. So walk them down that path, because if you ask to marry too quickly, you've scared them away for a long time, and they're going to be less likely to click on the next thing that you send, because they're going to see it as, oh, this is just another way they're going to try to hook me in and get me to buy something from them.
I would add to what Scott said too. I heard recently that it takes someone, I think it was 33 times to see something before they start really recognizing what it was and what they were seeing. So even if it's not, like Scott said, a direct call to action to do something, it's leading the customer or your audience through whatever process you want to bring them to that point where they're a viable lead for you. And that might not be an overt call to action at first. It might just be something that's very relatable that wants them to keep going and learn more.
Yeah, I'll throw in that, calls to action. We always kind of think about that big red button, at the bottom of our post. Calls to action can be all over the place, all over the post and on the page in certain areas. It could be, the hot blue link to another piece of content. You can be very creative, and I suggest that you utilize different ways to call to action throughout a person's content journey with you, and then measure that. Heat map. Conversion, metrics, things of that nature, and find what your crowd seems to gravitate towards, and then use the heck out of whatever that is, right? So it's not always that big red button, talk to a sales rep at the bottom, that we kind of think of traditionally as a call to action.
I want to go back to a question I started with, which was really regarding the theme of this session, which is getting us thinking about what's different now in the time of the pandemic. And on my podcast, I'm talking to a lot of business owners. And one of the things that we as business owners can probably all feel is that we don't want to be sold to, right? It just feels weird at certain times to be sold to, and we're sensitive to that. So let me ask you guys sort of generally, is that a change that you think is going to be pervasive? Are people pulling back on what would have been seen as more salesy in the past to be a little more sensitive to the times? Who wants to take that one?
I think to a degree that's been happening anyhow. I think the whole pushy sales kind of mentality has been kind of on the decline since really the internet came about, and people can do all this research online and educate themselves enough to start making that decision. So I don't know how much that would be necessarily COVID related, but I think that's where HubSpot has done a really good job with the whole inbound marketing approach, where it's like, hey, we're going to put the information out there so you can educate yourself. And then when you're ready to talk to somebody, just to make sure everything's lining up the way it's supposed to, we're here for you. And I think I like that approach. The whole inbound approach is strong for me.
The nonprofit sector, what I've seen is a lot more of posts that encourage engagement and relatability. So not so much on the sales, and I guess sales side for nonprofit typically means attracting donors, attracting funds in one way or another. But now with a lot of organizations closed, especially museums and art galleries and other performing arts as well, they really have to think about what kinds of content they're putting out that is going to encourage people to want to come after COVID is over and we're able to have a more normal time. And so instead of putting out that sales content now, or even that fundraising content now, they're looking more at how do they keep those audiences engaged and aware of what they're doing. And so I do see that as a change.
And I think to Carolyn's point, one of the things that we've just seen personally is organizations have started more, or it's been more easily to identify an organization's true identity of how they want to interact with prospects or current customers or donors. And I think we've all gotten those emails in the March and April timeframe from a organization that who knows how they even got that email. Maybe I signed up for that 3 years ago saying, hey, we're a SaaS tool and we're open. And by the way, if you want to get 20% off our technology, you can get this coupon code, right? And that was somehow some COVID-related outreach of them being sympathetic to the plight of their random subscriber list versus the organizations who have truly taken an approach and reached out and tried to provide information or resources or be beneficial to the decisions that their target audience is making. And so it's been very easy now to segment those organizations, I think, probably more so than it was in February or January. And those who have taken that authentically are going to be the ones I think that are going to win going forward, because those aren't easily forgotten, those kind of abrupt experiences that we've had.
Yeah, I think authenticity is a great word. That's definitely it's been something that those brands, you're right, those are the ones we're going to remember and think back and probably have in the case studies that they did a great job during this time. We have a question from Jack. What are some creative ideas to take my email campaign strategy beyond just a weekly newsletter summary? Who wants to take that one?
I'll jump in. I think the concept of a weekly newsletter summary is that it's a summary of what you've posted or sent, throughout that last period since the last time. And unless that summary of content is again a conversation, and hopefully a conversation around solving a problem that I have at my organization, it's probably not going to be opened and received and clicked through to your heart's content. So I think email, I've heard it a million times, email's dead, it's not going. During COVID, we're actually seeing more people rely on it than ever before. They're relying on audiences within their email lists that they never had before. So there's obviously some good and bad that can come out of that. So I think you have to be just again, more authentic, more relevant than ever before with every channel, and especially email. So if you're focusing on that, I think that helps you get out of that newsletter-ish, every Friday afternoon I'm reading something kind of thing.
Anyone else?
To add to Steve's point, I think the why should I care as a recipient is critically important in those emails. I think it is, and you've seen a lot of studies showing that it's beneficial to have consistency in the email so that I can expect it as a recipient. I know I'm going to get something from you, but I need to know that it's going to be valuable and it's worth my time reading it. And so I think having that weekly cadence can be valuable. To Steve's point, the content matters to me as a recipient, but also focusing and looking at, are there triggering events outside of that weekly cadence that if somebody does certain things, then we know that they're going to be interested in this type of an email or this type of information. To Robb's point, to kind of remove that friction and progress them in the process. Hey, I saw you did these few things. Here's an interesting piece of information that I think would be valuable to you based upon your actions. You're going to get a lot of engagement there because there's a feeling of mutual understanding of where they are and where they want to go. So layering in not just more email, but email that's targeting specific events or stages in their decision process, I think can help to expand an email strategy and get the most out of the investment from the technology and just the level of effort there.
Okay.
I think that can be challenging too. If you have one newsletter that you're sending out blanket to your entire contact database every week, you probably don't have content in there that's relevant to everybody, most likely, depending on your situation. But I think you might want to look at segmenting your list and sending out different content to different lists based off of what they're trying to achieve too.
Right, good point. And that's a lot of thinking that goes into the list and the health of the list. One of the things that we used to do in the past was have kind of a reactivation strategy too for people that weren't active. So depending on how big your list is, depends on how fine you can slice it. I want to have time for just a couple more questions here. So folks in the audience, do feel free to put something in chat. One thing I want to ask the panel to weigh in on is this relationship between marketing and sales when it comes to content marketing. Now, inherent in that phrase is the word marketing, of course, but I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is deliver across the funnel, and whatever framework you like to think about. One framework that I've heard about, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of the author to attribute it to, but I can say I did not invent it, is the concept of sidewalk, slow lane, and fast lane, if any of you have seen that framework, in the sense of someone's walking on the sidewalk type of slow pace. And these are people that aren't really aware they have a problem to solve. They haven't really started thinking about it yet. And they're sort of in the context of a funnel, maybe at that top of the funnel, right? And so maybe the awareness is what we would be trying to reach with them. Slow lane would be this middle lane. Maybe you're riding a bike or a moped. So these are people that are starting to be aware that they have a problem to solve. Maybe they're looking for referrals from people. They're talking to others about who they've used or what they've seen to solve that problem. And then this fast lane is, I need the solution right now. I'm experiencing a lot of pain. I need to solve this. I want to jump into a solution. I want to find it now. So in each of those three examples, you can kind of overlay content marketing / sales approach. And I do personally like the funnel visual of leading people through a thought process. But if you overlay that with the behavioral side and kind of this, where are they emotionally and what are they going through? Some other frameworks out there are the customer journey map. So the question to you guys in terms of best practices or what you've seen or experienced with clients or within your own firm is, which frameworks make the most sense to you, most effective, or which ones have you had the best results with in bringing together sales and marketing to drive what is ultimately, the conversion at that time, whatever that conversion is. The conversion might be go to the website. The conversion might be do a demo or talk to a sales rep or make an appointment. So it's a very broad question, and however you want to answer it, but I'm trying to create get an answer around frameworks to bring together sales and marketing. So Steve, why don't we start with you?
In my experience, it's always been most effective in working with sales groups is to understand the typical sales process, the length of times in between stages, and I think you're calling them lanes and things of that nature. As you hand leads off to salespeople or as they're doing their own prospecting, if you understand those stages, those time frames in between, you can build really relevant, and I think relevance the key here, relevant and timely pieces for sales to deliver to those folks. With currently at Webbula, we don't have a horribly long sales cycle. It's about 30 days. So we do get a kind of an initial engagement, and we have content that helps the salespeople provide that information, where they're that initial buzz about our products and services. And then sometimes organizations can go a little stale. They can go radio silent on you for a couple weeks, and that's radios. When I hear radio silent, I go, okay, you can push out that. We have an ebook that we did recently that has chock full of customer stories. It was written by a third party. It's not from Webbula's perspective. And it's been really effective in pushing people. It's an additional piece to, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while, but did you know that, when I thought of you and your situation, that you reminded me just like this customer, and here's how we've helped that person, right? That kind of thing. So I think giving stage appropriate, content to help, again, give salespeople another reason to check in is really, really important. And then also something that's valuable, obviously, for the person reading it to help make a decision, whether that decision is, yes, we're going to move forward, or, you know what, things cooled off here and reach out to me in 6 months. At least they know. Right. I think, any salesperson will tell you that competition isn't their greatest enemy. It's the no decision. Right. So giving a marketing job to give people that some content around that to help get a decision or next step, I think is very valuable to them.
Thank you. Rob?
It's interesting. So we're a marketing agency. And from a HubSpot perspective, we've really focused primarily on marketing, and then HubSpot had the sales hub. So we've started kind of, working more and more with sales, and it's interesting how big of a divide there is between sales and marketing. And then in sales in general, it's interesting how much tribal knowledge there is in sales, and this varies completely depending on the company. But I've seen companies where the sales reps don't like to share information with other sales reps or anybody. But I think sales marketing meetings are crucial at a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and getting the sales team to sit down and actually talk about things that they do. Sales people do tend to like to brag, and they're type A outgoing people. So they do like to tell stories. And if you can sit down and get them to share those stories that they've had with customers, with leads, I think that's a great way to start kind of getting the sales and marketing to work together and learn about what the front line is seeing, that the marketing team can then start to develop material for to help the sales reps do a better job or support their efforts anyhow.
Totally agree. Carolyn?
I always laugh when I hear sales, because nonprofits don't care about sales, but we do care about fundraising. And it's always the relationship building. So there's a certain number of things that go into marketing for the nonprofit. And I do work with a group now that has different levels of membership. So they have their beginner members, their intermediate members, and their experienced members. And each of those members need a different type of content and a different type of support from that organization. And so as we work through the marketing side of it, we really think about how we're going to relate to each of those. But then the sales portion of that, whether that's us facilitating some sort of support for that organization, or if it's fundraising or taking on a new donor or sponsor, that part of it typically comes through the relationship building period, where maybe you've had a couple of emails back and forth, but that's really the part where you're talking one-on-one with someone. So for my end of things, what I end up seeing a lot is the marketing side tends to be targeted but less personal, and then the sales or fundraising side is where that personal connection comes in, one-on-one, or building those relationships.
That's a really interesting point. That probably a lot of organizations could relate to that, not just development organizations. Scott?
I think this is the question as to why some people dislike the funnel because it's kind of treated as a one-way path of marketing attracts them, they engage them, they build a relationship, it goes to sales. And if sales can't close them, that's a failure of the sales team to not close them. And so everyone freaks out and tries to get them closed and doesn't want to hand them back over because that's not good for their numbers. And I think it's when, as was being discussed, marketing is being seen by sales as an enablement tool and less of a handoff from one department to another to get the deal done. And there's an option to go backwards. And so, hey, that deal did cool off. It's not right for right now. It's going to be a 3-month thing. Instead of it sitting on the salesperson's mind and being back there that, oh, I need to reach out to that person 2 months from now, there's a nurture campaign, or that's where that valuable weekly email newsletter or that third-party piece, as Steve had mentioned, that's just, hey, I'm trying to give you some information. I'm not trying to sell you anymore. I understand here's not the right time. But then monitoring what's happening with that person on those pieces and finding the right time to throw them back over to that salesperson again so that they can focus on those that are in that faster lane. And so I think that is the most important part. And I think going back to the first question, we've seen a lot more fluidity now over the last few months between sales and marketing than I think we ever had before, because sales is craving that digital information to build those relationships, and they know they can't just do the hard sell anymore.
Well, this has been a great panel. We're going to close with one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eric for some final remarks. And the question is, if anyone has any predictions for content trends that we should be paying attention to.
I think diversity of content delivery, podcast, video, today we have so many different ways to deliver content. So I think, especially with COVID, I think it's going to become, people are going to adopt more of those vehicles, those content vehicles coming in.
Mobile and video. I mean, I think you're going to continually see, entire articles that you used to write. They're just going to ask you, hey, Steve, talk about that for 3 minutes, which can be super intimidating to some marketers. But I just think people want to read, but they want to read less or in junkets of time, where we can feed them with content, video about our products and services and how we help customers, all day long.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I would say along with sort of content diversity is also engagement as being a big portion of that content marketing, is not only getting people to see what you're putting out, but getting them to engage with it. And that's something that is becoming more and more of a trend that I see, especially with email marketing and social media.
Scott, last?
I think the true personalization of that content experience that a person has. So not, hey, insert name, great to meet you, insert time you last met them in the email being called personalization, but actually changing the content experience based on who they are, what they interacted with last time they were on your site, or did they click on that email or not, and presenting articles or content or videos to them that matches their needs at that time. First doing it in a more manual way, and we're already seeing that starting to happen, and then truly automating that process so that when I go to the site versus somebody else, it may look nearly an entirely different site, giving me the information that I need at that time.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much to all the panelists. This was a lot of fun to work with you guys in putting this together. Turn it over to Eric for any last comments.
All right. Thanks so much. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope everybody got something beneficial out of it. I know I certainly did. I just want to thank everybody before we go. I want to thank Scott from UpContent, Robb from Pittsburgh Internet Consulting, Carolyn from Curio 412, Laurie, of course, thank you for moderating, and of course, Steve and Webbula for sponsoring. So make sure after we're done here, check out Webbula.com. They got a free trial. You can go and help clean, protect, and grow your email through them. And of course, please don't forget to meet me and Jack online at Marketing Pittsburgh. Join the community, mktpgh.com. And I think that is it. We're out of here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.